Friends, COBRA feels like real insurance, and it is, for almost everything. It pays your medical bills, it covers your prescriptions, it looks and feels exactly like the health insurance you had while working. But Medicare does not see COBRA the way you do. And that one misunderstanding is responsible for more permanent Medicare penalties than almost any other mistake we cover on this channel. Today I am going to walk you through exactly why COBRA does not count as active employer coverage in Medicare's eyes, how the two enrollment windows that matter actually work, and what one retiree's decision to rely on COBRA cost her permanently. You will learn the two specific windows, an 8-month window for Part B and a much shorter 63-day window for Part 500, and why COBRA does not pause either clock. Quick note, this is education, not personalized legal or insurance advice. Please talk with a licensed Medicare specialist before making any enrollment decisions. And stay with me for the dollar math near the end, because seeing the exact cost of this mistake in real numbers is what makes the rules stick. Let me start with a story. There is a woman, we'll call her Susan. Susan retired at 65 from a corporate job she had held for 18 years. Her employer offered COBRA continuation coverage, the same health plan she had while working, just paid for out of her own pocket. Susan elected COBRA. The premium was higher than she expected, but the coverage felt seamless. Same doctors, same prescriptions, same card in her wallet. She figured, I already have coverage. I will deal with Medicare when my COBRA runs out. That decision sounds completely reasonable. It is exactly what most people in her situation would assume is correct. 14 months later, Susan's COBRA coverage ended. She called Medicare to enroll, and the representative told her something that stopped her cold. Her special enrollment period had closed 11 months earlier. Because COBRA does not extend Medicare's enrollment windows, the clock had started the day her active employer coverage, the real coverage, before COBRA, actually ended. Susan now carries a permanent Part B penalty and a permanent Part 500 penalty for the rest of her life. Now let me show you Sandra, Susan's former co-worker. Sandra also retired at 65 from the same company. She also had the option to elect COBRA. She was in a nearly identical situation to Susan. But before Sandra signed anything, she called Medicare directly and asked one specific question. If I take COBRA, does that give me more time to enroll in Medicare? The Medicare representative explained clearly, no, COBRA does not extend your enrollment windows. Your special enrollment period is based on when your active employer coverage ends, not when COBRA ends. Sandra enrolled in Medicare Part B and Part 500 during her special enrollment period, well before her COBRA coverage would have ended. Standard premiums, no penalty, ever. Same company, same retirement age, same COBRA option on the table. Susan carries a permanent penalty. Sandra pays the standard rate for life. The difference was one question Sandra asked before she signed her COBRA paperwork, and Susan did not. Let me ask you, if you or your spouse are on COBRA right now, or planning to elect it, do you know exactly when your Medicare enrollment window opened and when it closes? To understand what happened to Susan, you need to understand exactly why Medicare treats COBRA differently than active employer coverage, because the distinction is specific, and it is not intuitive. Medicare gives you a special enrollment period, an SAP, that lets you delay Part B and Part 500 without penalty, but only under one specific condition. You must be covered under a group health plan based on your own or your spouse's current active employment. The word active is doing all the work in that sentence. Active means you or your spouse are still working right now, and the coverage comes from that current job. COBRA is coverage from a former job. The employment relationship that generated the coverage has already ended. Medicare does not consider this active employer coverage, no matter how similar the plan feels. This is true even though COBRA is by law a continuation of that same group health plan. Even though the premiums, the network, and the benefits are identical, Medicare looks at the employment status, not the plan itself. So the moment your active employment ends, the day you retire, the day you leave the job, your special enrollment period clock starts. Whether or not you elect COBRA afterward, this is the exact mechanism that caught Susan. Her active employment ended on her retirement date. Her special enrollment period began that same day, even though she still had insurance through COBRA. Now let's look at the two specific windows and exactly how long each one lasts. The Part B special enrollment period is 8 months long. It begins the month your active employer coverage ends, not the month COBRA ends. For Susan, her active coverage ended the day she retired. Her 8-month Part B window ran from that date, completely independent of the 14 months she spent on COBRA afterward. The Part 500 special enrollment period is much shorter, 63 days. It also begins the day your active employer coverage ends. 63 days is just over 2 months. It is dramatically shorter than the 8-month Part B window, and it is the window most people miss entirely because they assume the timelines match. This mismatch is exactly why so many retirees miss their Part 500 window, even when they are still technically inside their Part B window. They assume they have 8 months for everything. Now, here is the detail that surprises people most when they hear this rule explained clearly for the first time. COBRA can actually work in your favor, but only if your timing lines up correctly with your Medicare enrollment window, not instead of it. Some retirees intentionally use COBRA as a short bridge, a few months of continuity while they complete their Medicare enrollment paperwork, while enrolling in Medicare during their proper set at the same time. This works fine. What does not work is treating COBRA as a substitute for Medicare enrollment, assuming the coverage itself buys you more time. Stay with me, because there is one more scenario worth covering, and it applies specifically to people who are still actively working past 65. If you are still working at 65 under your own current employer's group health plan with 20 or more employees, you qualify for the special enrollment period the entire time you remain actively employed. In this situation, the SEP clock only starts when that active employment ends. If you then elect COBRA after retiring, the SEP clock has already started, running from your retirement date, not your COBRA election. There is one narrow exception worth knowing about. If you are laid off and your former employer offers COBRA under specific federal assistance programs during certain periods, special rules have occasionally applied. These programs are temporary and change over time. Always verify current rules directly with Medicare or a licensed specialist. For the vast majority of retirees electing standard COBRA after leaving a job voluntarily or through normal retirement, the rule is simple and consistent. COBRA does not extend your Medicare enrollment windows. In a moment, I will put Susan's complete dollar picture on the table, what her permanent Part B and Part 500 penalties actually cost her over a 20-year retirement. But first, what should you actually do if you are approaching retirement with COBRA in the picture? The correct sequence is this. First, mark your last day of active employment on a calendar. That date starts both of your Medicare clocks, regardless of anything else. Second, enroll in Medicare Part B and Part 500 during your special enrollment period, counting from that date, not from any COBRA election or COBRA end date. Third, if you want the extra continuity of COBRA during the transition, elect it as a supplement alongside Medicare, never as a replacement for enrolling on time. This sequence protects you regardless of how appealing the COBRA continuation coverage looks on paper. Now let's put the full numbers on the table. Susan missed her Part B special enrollment period by roughly 3 full 12-month periods before she finally enrolled. Part B carries a 10% penalty for each 12-month period missed. A 30% permanent surcharge on the standard Part B premium of approximately $185 a month adds roughly $56 a month to Susan's premium for life. Her Part 500 penalty is calculated separately. Missing that window by approximately 13 months adds a 13% permanent surcharge to her Part 500 premium. On a base Part 500 premium of approximately $37, that 13% surcharge adds close to $5 a month permanently, modest on its own, but compounding with the Part B penalty. Combined, Susan's permanent Part B and Part 500 surcharge is approximately $61 a month. Over 12 months, that is $732 a year. Over a 20-year retirement, accounting for base premiums rising over time, Susan's cumulative penalty cost approaches $14,640 before any premium inflation is even factored in. $14,640 for a decision that felt like the responsible, cautious choice, keeping her existing coverage a little longer. Now let's look at Sandra. Same company, same retirement age, same COBRA option available to her. Sandra enrolled in Medicare Part B and Part 500 during her proper special enrollment period, the 8-month and 63-day windows that began on her retirement date. Her total Medicare premium cost over the same 20-year period is approximately $14,640 lower than Susan's, the exact amount of Susan's penalty. Same company, same retirement year, same COBRA offer on the table. The only difference was whether each woman understood what COBRA actually does and does not do for Medicare enrollment timing. This is not a story about Susan making a careless decision. It is a story about a genuinely reasonable assumption that happened to be wrong. All right, friends, let's bring this home with a checklist you can use this week. I want you to imagine we're sitting at your kitchen table together, coffee between us, notepad open, and I'm walking you through 5 questions every person approaching retirement with COBRA in the picture needs to answer. First, what is your exact last day of active employment, or your spouse's, if their coverage applies to you? Write that date down. It is the single most important date in this entire process because both your Part B and Part 500 special enrollment periods count from that day, regardless of what happens with COBRA afterward. Second, have you counted your 8-month Part B window and your 63-day Part 500 window from that exact date? Count forward 8 months for Part B. Count forward 63 days separately for Part 500. Write both deadlines on your calendar in red because the Part 500 window will close much sooner than the Part B window. Third, are you planning to elect COBRA, and if so, do you understand it will not extend either deadline? If your answer is yes, use COBRA as a bridge alongside your Medicare enrollment, not as a reason to delay it. Enroll in Medicare on the timeline you just calculated, regardless of your COBRA election. Fourth, have you called Medicare directly or 1-800-MEDICARE to verify your specific SEP dates before you rely on your own calculation? Your own calculation is a starting point, not a final answer. Medicare representatives can confirm your specific dates based on your actual employment and coverage records, a 10-minute call that can prevent a permanent penalty. Fifth, if you are married, have you confirmed whether your spouse's active employment coverage affects your own Medicare timeline? If you are covered under a spouse who is still actively working, your Medicare SEP may be tied to their employment status rather than your own retirement date. This is a detail that requires a direct conversation with Medicare to get right. These 5 questions will not undo a penalty that has already attached. But for everyone who has not yet retired or who is retiring soon with COBRA on the table, they can prevent the exact situation Susan experienced. Here's my challenge to you after this video. This week, write down your exact last day of active employment or your spouse's if that applies. Count forward 8 months for Part B and 63 days for Part 500. Mark both dates on your calendar in red. Second, if COBRA is part of your plan, call 1-800-MEDICARE this week and confirm your specific SEP dates before you assume anything based on your own calculation. Third, if you are already retired and past your enrollment window without knowing it, call Medicare today and ask what options remain. The sooner you enroll, the sooner your permanent penalty stops accumulating additional months. Susan has since enrolled in Medicare. Her penalty is permanent, but she stopped it from growing further. She now tells every coworker approaching retirement about the 63-day window before they sign a single piece of COBRA paperwork. Sandra has never paid a penalty month. Her one phone call before signing COBRA paperwork remains, in her words, the best 30 minutes she spent in her entire retirement transition. COBRA and Medicare are not the same clock. They run independently. Knowing that one fact before you sign anything is the entire difference between Susan's story and Sandra's. You can always find good health coverage in retirement. You cannot go back and reopen an enrollment window that closed while you assumed COBRA was buying you more time. If this helped you see your COBRA and Medicare timeline more clearly today, do 3 things for me. Hit that like button so YouTube shows this to more people approaching retirement who are about to sign COBRA paperwork without knowing what it does and does not do for their Medicare timeline. Subscribe to The Quiet Retirement for more plain-spoken Social Security and Medicare explanations, the rules that actually affect your retirement income, one video at a time. And in the comments, tell me whether you knew COBRA does not extend your Medicare enrollment window before today. And if you are retiring soon with COBRA on the table, what is your biggest remaining question? I read every comment, and your answers help me make better videos for you. I'm Uncle John, reminding you your money is important, but your time and your health are priceless. Let's use the rules to your advantage, not theirs. I'll see you in the next one.